our next story, and this is about David Sirota and Breaking Points, or this merger. But I want to address the issue with David Sirota first. Now, as many of you know, if you watched me the other night, I did explain to you that I did invite David Sirota on to have this discussion about putting progressives through the Democratic Party. I invited him on to talk about a different strategy, a different option. David Sirota obviously doesn't want to have that discussion with someone who's going to challenge him. He wants to have that discussion with people who are not going to push back. I'm not that person. But what he's been doing all week on Twitter, after he blocked RBN, by the way, he blocked RBN. He has been tweeting about people like us that are tired of doing this strategy. Yes, gamer, thank you for that, Sirota. I always want to say Sirota. He's been tweeting about us. I'm going to show you the tweets. I'm going to play an audio clip for you. And then I'm going to show you some receipts. Because there was something about David Sirota to me that just rubbed me the wrong way. I felt like he was really trying to keep people in the Democratic Party. And I had to ask myself, does he have something to gain from that? And if you are new, I do want to let you know that David Sirota is married to a Democrat politician. So you need to know that, because you need to understand that David Sirota has been compromised. He's always going to try to keep you in the Democratic Party. Listen to this. This is one of the many tweets that he sent out over the past couple of days. He says, listen to the last 8 minutes about both the Democratic tribalists who ruin politics and about third-party advocates who smugly insist they are smarter and better than everyone else. Now, I want to go ahead and say this. That is not what we've said. I've never told you on the show that I was smarter or better than anyone else. I said this strategy is done and we need to move on to something else. But what I've noticed is that when we say that, what he hears is that the people who do want to do that strategy are dumb. Even though I'm not saying that, that's what he's hearing. He goes on to say, trying to fix the Dem party, great. Trying to organize for a third party, great. All of it can be constructive. Now, this is the opposite of what he said on Crystal Kyle and Friends. So now he's trying to backtrack. Only total narcissistic assholes pretend these are intention. I want you to remember this part right here where it says intention, because later on, I'm going to play something from MLK that discusses tension and the moderate, and try to portray themselves as morally better or smarter than the other. See, again, I've never said that, but that's what David Sirota hears when you want to do a different strategy. That's the way that he feels. He goes on to say, one thing to add, there's a lot of online tweeting about third parties at the glamorous presidential level and not very much offline third party organizing at the unglamorous local level. That's actually not true. And if David Sirota would have actually had this conversation with those of us at RBN, he would actually know about people who are organizing on the local level. But he doesn't, because he doesn't talk to working class people. He doesn't talk to people outside of his class. He doesn't talk to people outside of his bubble. He talks to people that make him feel comfortable. This has been an enormous problem for third party building, says the guy who's trying to keep you in the Democratic Party. So David Sirota did an interview recently. It's an audio interview. I'm not going to play the entire thing, but there's a portion of it that I do want you to listen to, and I'm going to comment on it. I'm going to point out certain things that he says, and then I'm going to show you some receipts about David Sirota and why he's trying to keep you in the Democratic Party. So let's go ahead and play here.
Into the Democratic Party in order to get them elected and to eventually kind of take over the party and to kind of reorient it in this.
Oh, by the way, this is from the podcast called The Insurgents. And I didn't have to dig for this because David Sirota shared it on Twitter. So there's that.
More progressive direction. I know you're still kind of excited about this prospect, but do you still believe, like, fundamentally, that it's possible
No,
to
I wouldn't say I'm
orient
excited about it, but
but do you still think it's
Pay attention to what he just said. I wouldn't say I'm excited about it. Not excited about that strategy. But yet he wants to criticize and point fingers at people who don't want to do the strategy anymore. And here he is admitting he's not excited about it. So how are you going to get people excited about something you're not excited about, David? Let's go on.
believe that it's possible to actually democratically reorient the Democratic Party into that more progressive direction, to kind of wrestle power away from the establishment. You know, I talked about all these really important issues, like in Don't Look Up, the future of the planet, the climate crisis, even this kind of gradual process of running candidates into the Democratic Party. We're still talking about a multi-years long project in order to even get to the idea of possibly gaining power. Ultimately, do you
So the gentleman who's interviewing him says this is a multi-years project. Listen.
think this is enough to deal with the crises that America's facing, or do you think there needs to be more?
I'm not sure it's multi-year in the sense that I think one thing recent history has proved is that things can change very fast. So I'm not sure it's multi-year.
What's changed very fast by putting progressives through the Democratic Party? What has changed very fast? I'll wait. Just because people won, does that really mean anything if they didn't fight for us? Does that really mean anything when they've sold out and they're going along with corporate Democrats? No, it doesn't mean anything. What changed very quickly, David?
But yes, it's not an easy slog. Look, I am in many ways tactically agnostic, and I think people get hung up on, can the Democratic Party get remoored, changed, or do we need a third party? And frankly, I find one of the most annoying kinds of folks out there are the people who say, oh, both parties are corrupt, and anybody who thinks changing the Democratic Party is a worthy goal or can even be done is an idiot, and I'm a smart person because I vote third party. Listen.
See, again, that goes to show you that's what he hears. When we say both parties are corrupt, we're going to vote third party or independent, or some people decide not to vote at all, we're going to focus on direct action and mutual aid. What he hears is that anyone who does that strategy is stupid, because that's how David feels. That's not what we've said.
I am tactically agnostic. I'm about results. What's the fastest way to deal with climate change? What's the fastest fucking way to deal with the comet? Right? If that means a third party can win, great. If that means changing the Democratic Party is faster, great. If that means...
So David's talking about changing or improving the climate, and he wants to do this quickly. So he's trying to figure out what's the fastest way of doing it. Now, he changes his position here. When he was on Crystal Kyle and Friends, he said the fastest way of doing that was through the Democratic Party. CJ debunked that. How is that the fastest way of doing it when the president of the United States, who's a Democrat, is pro-fracking? When the president of the United States and the Democrat Congress, the Democrats that you have in the House, which includes the progressives, are continuing to give money for the military-industrial complex to continue to attack countries abroad. So you want to talk about changing the climate? The fastest way of doing that is to combat the military-industrial complex, to stop these wars. Is that going to happen through the Democratic Party? No, it's not happening right now. Damn sure hasn't been happening the past couple of years, because both parties are pro-war. Now, in this segment, now he comes back and he says, well, whether it's through third party or Democratic Party, I'm fine with either one. That wasn't what he said on Crystal Kyle and Friends, and CJ corrected him.
Both those things at the same time, great. I think we're stuck in a system right now. The preference is a two-party system, and the two parties basically suck. And I don't buy that.
Here he is telling us the two parties basically suck. Okay, David, then why are you still trying to keep us in the Democratic Party?
People are are more enlightened or smarter or more pure who say,
he keeps bringing up this smarter issue. Again, he keeps bringing this up. That's why it tells me this is exactly what David hears.
I'm never going to vote for a Democrat no matter what, because both parties are corrupt. Voting is not a religious fucking experience, right? It's not an experience of self-expression. If you think voting is self-expression, you don't, frankly, in my view, you don't really understand the system you're living in. Voting is.
Do you understand the system that the rest of us are living in, David? I'm talking about people who are working class, people who are poor. Hell, also, you might as well include middle class now, too, as a part of this with inflation. Do you understand the system that we are living in? Because you're not a part of our class. You're like way up here. We're down here. You're not in the same class as us. Do you understand what we're dealing with?
There's one way to try to get what you want. So when you go and vote in a general election and you're faced with a white nationalist fascist versus a shit Democrat,
let's correct his framing here. He sounds really nervous on this call. He sounds really nervous. He sounds a little unhinged, a little uncomfortable. Let's change his framing here. When you go in to vote for a general election and you're faced with the option of a white nationalist fascist versus the Democrat candidate, David Sirota is separating the two. He's assuming that Democrats can't be white nationalist fascists. That's a problem. Democrats are racist too. I live in blue Massachusetts. There are racist Democrats, boo. There are also racist progressives here. Did you catch that? You see how he's separating the two? He is linking racism with the right and pretending like there is no racism with the Democratic Party and on the left. This is why you need to listen to Black commentators. This is why. David Sirota has a large following on Twitter. He reaches a lot of people. And this is the problem with having rich white leftists be the primary narrative in this space. They don't get it. They don't understand. You critique them in any little way and they get all bent up out of shape. Nick critiqued him one time on Twitter and he lost his shit. Let's continue.
I don't think that's not an enjoyable choice, but the system isn't giving you an enjoyable.
That's not an enjoyable choice, but he wants you to do it anyway.
Enjoyable choice, and in that particular situation, you have to try to make a moral choice inside of an immoral system, right?
What is moral about Joe Biden? What's moral about Crime Bill Joe? The damage that Joe Biden has done to the Black community and continues to do to the Black community, how is that moral? Notice he said the but. He wants you to do it anyway. You know why? Because for people like David Sirota, they have no sense of urgency. David Sirota is well paid. He doesn't have to worry about health care. He doesn't have to worry about student loan debt. Remember, he also works for Hollywood. He's not just a journalist. No sense of urgency. He also mentions the only options as electoral. Nothing about direct action, nothing about mutual aid, nothing about getting out in the streets and flipping this motherfucker, okay? Nothing about that. And David Sirota knows that the civil rights movement didn't happen through electoral politics. That happened through direct action and a lot of pressure on politicians. So why is David Sirota pretending like the only thing that you can do has to be done through electoral politics?
And if you know in your heart that third-party infrastructure in that particular race hasn't been built, and that thus voting for a third party is incinerating your vote. And
here we go with you're wasting your vote if you vote third party or independent. He's one of those people. I want to remind you, Jill Stein was on the ballot in 45 states in this country. Infrastructure was set up for Jill. You have Green Party candidates that have assumed local office in the United States. They do really well on the local level.
And arguably helping the fascists, then why?
If you vote third party, you're helping the fascists. Do you see the problem with the framing? Do you see the problem with the framing? He's the person that will tell you, I understand you don't want to vote for those two options because they're both bad. They're both bad. But he's also telling you, if you vote third party or you don't vote, then you're letting the fascists win. That's that guilt that they throw in at the end to keep your ass in the Democratic Party.
Then doing that as a point of self-expression on your supposed purity is, in my—
Listen to this. Doing that as a sense of self-expression, as a sense of purity. No, David, we're doing that because it's a class issue, which I don't expect to understand. That's the problem, David. It is a class issue. He's trying to make it a purity test because David Sirota doesn't want to talk about the class that he's in.
My view, I mean, you're welcome to do what you want. In my view, that's not a good decision because you're mixing up what the voting experience is and is not. I think if there's going to be a third party in this country, a lot of work needs to go into actually building it, and building it in the least glamorous places, not at the presidential level, but winning city.
Building a third party, not at the presidential level. So I just told you guys, and I've told you multiple times before, when it comes to third party and independent candidates, they actually do well on the local level. So what the fuck is David talking about?
Council races, winning state legislative races. And I think there's coalition models where you've got DSA endorsing Democratic candidates. You've got the Working Families Party that goes into coalition, sometimes goes into opposition with the Democrats.
Bro, I got to shout this out. Katie Lewis said, bruh, who the fuck is he to tell us what the voting experience is? Thank you so much for saying that, Katie. Thank you so much. For those who don't know, David Sirota was Bernie Sanders' speech writer. I'm going to get into that in a second too.
Democratic Party. And I think people who get hung up on, it goes back to this tactics and values thing, this idea that it's a fool's errand and everybody's impure and a terrible person.
It's a fool's errand. Who are you talking about? Shama Sawant, David? Because the person known for saying that is Shama Sawant. Why don't you have this conversation with her?
And for even thinking that it's worthwhile to try to change the Democratic Party, I just reject that. And I think it's narcissistic and I think it's bullshit. And I similarly—
Of course you rejected, David. You're rich. Let's go away from this. I'm going to show you some receipts. We can talk about this. We can be on this audio all night. We really can. But I need to show you some receipts because there's something about David that's really suspect. So let's go back in time. Let's remember David's position about force the vote. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to David holding politicians accountable.
What that is. And so we brought him on the show, and there's a big controversy. I don't know if you saw the show, but we heard him saying that he was not willing to sacrifice Nancy Pelosi losing her speakerships. He was not going to play that game because Nancy Pelosi would let Kevin McCarthy become speaker. Here, he says it here. Here we go.
Nancy Pelosi, I think ultimately at the end of the day, if you really demanded that she actually do something on Medicare for all, it was a choice between letting Kevin McCarthy become Speaker of the House, which would be a very bad thing, or doing something real on Medicare for all.
That was a lie. That was already debunked that Kevin McCarthy would not become Speaker of the House. Now, David Sirota is a journalist. He didn't do his research before he came on Jimmy Dore and spewed that lie. What is his role in all this? What is David Sirota's role? I believe his role was to keep you in the two-party system in the Democratic Party. He went on there and he lied. Listen to this. He didn't want to hold the squad accountable. That's what that was about.
I don't have a confidence that she would care to do the right thing. And so when you're negotiating with people like that, that's the trump card, no pun intended, that they're willing to do actual, true, serious damage to human beings. And that's a real problem when you're trying to negotiate with people like that.
So he's setting the table that Nancy Pelosi is willing to go nuclear, let Kevin McCarthy become speaker. Now, there's a big problem with that. I'm going to tell you what it is in a second. That couldn't happen. That's the problem. But let's finish this. Here you saying, David, is you're giving an out for them to not do this. And that's
No, I'm not giving them an out.
Yeah,
I'm saying I don't know the answer to when push really came to shove. If you said, I want these things that you really don't want to do, and that those lawmakers should then vote in the way that we're talking about to elect Kevin McCarthy speaker. At
that's
the
up to
very end
Nancy.
He said it twice. He said it twice to elect Kevin McCarthy as speaker.
And maybe we don't have to give it out. Maybe we don't. Maybe it's sort of a moot point. I don't know. But I'm saying, like, when I think through that, just as a human being,
you're misframing this. You keep misframing the issue. Yeah. You're misframing it as, are you really going to hand it over to? No, that's Nancy Pelosi's call. That's how you play. It's called negotiating. Let me finish. What you're asking to do is negotiate from a position of weakness, and you have that energy of defeat already. So that is a mistake.
I don't think I do. I'm only admitting that we're dealing with people who don't care about the consequences.
You're saying we can't fight. You're saying we can't do it.
And it's a troubling situation.
Mm-hmm. So it sounded to us like you can't. And that's what it sounded like to us.
Yep.
So
his job. Let me just come in here for a second. When we want to hold the squad and them accountable, David Sirota's job is to come in and prevent you from doing that. David Sirota didn't want them to force the vote, because he didn't want the American people to see who's who in the House, to see how people would have voted when it came down to Medicare for all. Let's go back.
And by the way, what he's saying is this is not a fear. Kevin McCarthy can't become speaker. The Democrats have the majority. And how do I know this? Because Ryan Grimm was on right before David Sirota came on and told me.
Yep.
She has to go to the House floor, and she has to get 218 votes.
Right.
And Republicans aren't going to vote for her. And so if she can't get 218 Democrats, then there's no speaker.
Right.
And then it kicks back to the caucus, and then it's chaos, and then a whole bunch of people can run, and then somebody will emerge. Somebody would emerge from that process, who would then also need to unify the party and say, we need 218 votes to get to the House floor. So she won it in the caucus, but she has to get through the process. Because
all right, I'm not going to go too far into this because I have other things I need to show you as well. But even Ryan Grimm said that Kevin McCarthy would not become speaker. And although Ryan Grimm did not agree with force the vote, he didn't come on Jimmy Dore show and lie about it. So what's David's role? I want to show you something else. I told you I was coming with receipts tonight. David Sirota did pretty well working for Bernie Sanders' campaign financially. Let's pull up these numbers. Now, this is the report from the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. This is not something I'm making up. You can look this up yourself as well. These are all the disbursements. Look at that. 12,000, 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. It goes on and on and on and on. This was during Bernie 2020. I can actually increase this. Let's go to the max, which is 100, going all the way down. I did the math on my end, so I wouldn't make you guys sit through all of that. David Sirota made over $150,000 off of Bernie Sanders' campaign. That's just the Bernie part. That doesn't include all the other financials that he makes. He also works for Hollywood. He also has his own network that he started as well. David is paid. Don't forget, he just did Don't Look Up. That was nominated for an Oscar. I told you the issue is not a purist issue. The issue is a class issue. That's where the divide comes in. Let's go to receipt number 2. You know, David, David, you got some explaining to do. I told you there was something off about David Sirota. Did you know that David Sirota was actually involved in a race baiting website for campaign back in Philadelphia? New Sanders aide apologizes for role in race baiting 1999 website. Now, this news broke in 2019. David Sirota, who is Bernie Sanders announced this week would be joining as his campaign speechwriter, was hired by the senator for a different job 2 decades ago. Let's go down here where it says 1999. In 1999 mayor race in Philadelphia, Sirota was tied to a fake website apparently intended to scare off white residents from voting for a black opponent. I'm not making this up myself. Eric, if you want, you could put the link to this article in the chat so people can read the whole thing. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but there are parts that I do need to highlight. And if he tries to come back and say that this did not happen, here's the statement from him right here. I deeply regret being involved in this whole incident. There you go. I'm absolutely ashamed that it happened, and I have felt genuinely terrible about this for 20 years. Even though I was a junior political staffer, I should have known better and certainly do today. Really doesn't matter if you were a junior political staffer, David. You want to talk about morals? You knew that shit was wrong. Let's go on. Sirota was the deputy campaign manager for Dwight Evans, a candidate in the 1999 Democratic primary for the mayor of Philadelphia. So David's involvement with the Democratic Party, this goes all the way back to the 90s. He's been deep in the Democratic Party. Let's go back in. The site, which was made to look like a page of Evans' rival, John White, featured a comment White made in large letters. Here's what the comment said. The black and the brown, if we unite, we're going to control this city. Now, here's the problem. White's campaign said his statement was taken out of context and that he meant that African Americans and Latinos could achieve more political power if they worked together. Now, listen to this part. The revelation that Sirota was linked to a race baiting website comes as Sanders is trying to make inroads with middle-aged and older African-American voters who he failed to win over in 2016. So you see how something like this hurt Bernie's campaign with black people? You see, it's making a little bit more sense now, right? Right? Let's go back down here. Evans, who is also African American, was seen as competing with white to win over white voters. Evans said at the time that Sirota was in his early 20s, had been overzealous. He called the bogus website Dirty Tricks. The site was registered to the address of Robert Richmond, a friend of Sirota who lived in Massachusetts. Evans believed that Sirota had not made the website himself, but discussed it with Richmond. I found out they were basically talking to each other and one thing to another. Now listen to this. At the time, Sirota denied any direct involvement. Did you guys hear that? At the time when he was accused, he said he had no direct involvement. And Richmond also initially claimed that he was not involved. But then when he was busted, he came back later on and issued an apology right here. I deeply regret being involved in this whole incident. So again, who is David? What's race baiting? Oh, Sebastian, man. It's like, how old are you, Sebastian? I forget sometimes. I forget. It's like when you try to use race to like get people to either do something or to not do something. And in this instance, that website, they were trying to make it so that the white voters would not vote for the black candidate. That's basically what they were doing. It's really fucked up. Let's go to the third receipt. Oh boy. Now, people have mistakes from their past. They grow. Sometimes they learn from them. But it's kind of suspicious when you be deleting stuff that you put out there for the world to see. So now this was fairly recent. Now this was shared by Blake Flayton. He said the grand finale. This is from David Sirota. I worked at APAC for a few months after graduating college. It's a terrible organization that is ruining the world. For those ready to tweet that I'm anti-Semitic, I'm Jewish, F you. This tweet has been deleted. Why you delete the tweet? I don't trust this dude. Like this is look, I know AIPAC is a horrible organization. At the time, he may not have realized that. Later on, he did and left. AIPAC is an organization that's been pouring in big money to stop the progressive candidates from winning against these corporate Democrats. But why did you delete it? Let's go to number 4. This one's troubling. Now, this was something I was not aware of for a while, but this is on his own website. Let's scroll down here. And if you go down to where it says previous political work, this one is really suspect. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. Previous political work. He also worked at the Center for American Progress. Now, what is wrong with the Center for American Progress? Again, this is from his website. Let's look at the Center for American Progress. I'm telling you, he's been deep in the Democratic Party. You can't just look at him as though he was just Bernie's speechwriter. This goes deeper than that. The Center for American Progress. This is the same organization that Neera Tanden was the president of. Now, what was wrong with Neera Tanden? Oh boy. She is committed, a public servant, having served in the administrations of President Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and a longtime advisor to Hillary Clinton. What? We all know Neera Tanden. She's suspect. She's problematic. And I've told you guys before, the Center for American Progress, they supported Hillary Clinton. David Sirota had one foot on the corporate Dem side, and he had one foot on the progressive Dem side. He was trying to play on two teams. So what would happen if the progressive doesn't win? Someone like David Sirota is going to tell you to go ahead and vote for the corporate Democrat, which is what he's doing now which is what he has been doing. He's been deep in the Democratic Party. There's more. This one is probably the most troubling. Now, this tweet is from David Brock. I'm going to tell you who David Brock is in just a second. David Brock put this out. He said, @ShareBlue is on an ambitious growth trajectory. I wish David Sirota well in his future endeavors. My full statement on the news. So at one point in time, David Sirota worked with ShareBlue and decided to leave. I'm going to get into that in just a second, and I'm going to explain to you why ShareBlue was problematic. ShareBlue is on an ambitious growth trajectory. We read that part already. We have seen an uptick in funding and investors and look forward to announcing new senior staff and editorial positions soon. I wish David Sirota well in his future endeavors. This again is from David Brock. He's the founder of ShareBlue. Now, what's the problem with ShareBlue and what's the problem with David Brock? Here we go. Now, this is when he announced that he was leaving ShareBlue. Investigative reporter David Sirota has backed out of the left's answer to Breitbart. Now, here's the part that you need to pay close attention to here. Investigative journalist David Sirota has backed out of the job to lead True Blue Media. The David Brock brainchild pitched as the Breitbart of the left as its new CEO. So again, that's the I'm leaving statement there. And then here's the part that I want you to hear as to why he chose to leave. And it's not going to be what you think. True Blue Media. I believe in nonpartisan accountability journalism. This is coming from David Sirota. However, the circumstances of the job subsequently changed. True Blue Media does not now have in hand the resources for the kind of independent, nonpartisan journalism I want to continue to do, and that is needed to execute on the ambitious editorial strategy that we agreed on. Therefore, I've decided to turn down the job. I wish David Brock all the best. So the reason why he decided to leave is not because of what they were doing, but it's because they didn't have the resources. But let me show you what they were doing. Now, the key failure by a key element of the Democratic establishment to recruit Sirota, an anti-corporate outsider from the party Sanders wing, points to the challenge Democratic donors and elites face in challenging a movement that at the end of the day has little love for them. Hold on to your seats for this part. True Blue, which operates as ShareBlue, was part of a cadre of liberal outlets that supported Hillary Clinton's failed presidential campaign. I kid you not. I'm going to highlight this. True Blue, which operates as ShareBlue, was part of a cadre liberal outlets that supported Hillary Clinton's failed presidential campaign. So why was David working for a company that backed Hillary Clinton's campaign when he was a part of Bernie Sanders' campaign? Anybody? He said he left earlier on because they didn't have the resources. Basically, David wanted some money. That's what this is about. I told you, 1 foot on the corporate Dem side, he got 1 foot on the progressive Dem side. That's the problem with David Sirota. There's more. There was something else that this company was doing. And David Brock. And this is why David Brock is problematic. A quick taste of how online troll army like Hillary's Correct the Record functions. I don't know if every one of you remembers Correct the Record, but you got to follow this. So listen to this. We told you last month that Hillary Clinton's super PAC Correct the Record under the guidance of political hatchman David Brock, was spending $1 million on an army of Twitter trolls. We got a taste of the digital stormtroopers in action when at least a couple of them colluded to get Bernie Sanders' Facebook pages shut down. So let's hear this again. Again, all these people are connected. All these people are connected. We told you last month that Hillary Clinton's super PAC Correct the Record, under the guidance of political hatchman David Brock, that's who David Sirota was working for. David Brock was spending $1 million on an army of Twitter trolls. We got a taste of the digital stormtroopers in action when at least a couple of them colluded to get Bernie Sanders' Facebook pages shut down. But he was working for a Bernie Sanders campaign. There's more. Like, I can't make this stuff up. So that's the portion about David Sirota. Now, where does Breaking Points come in? Now that David Sirota has been announced as being added a part of Breaking Points, as a partner of Breaking Points, I want you to listen to this announcement. There's some things I'm going to point out, and then I want to show you how David Sirota and how people like Crystal Ball on Breaking Points, how they're saying the same message. I want you to think about that audio that I played for you earlier on, and you're going to hear the same talking points. Listen to this.
And then from there, when we can cover those expenses on top of the studio and all of the other extraneous business expenses that we have to pay, now we are able to partner with all of these great people. So we have a graphic here. Let's put this up there on the screen. It's kind of like planets that circle here. I mean, not just on top of Crystal and I's own personal projects like the realignment and Crystal, Kyle, and Friends. Kyle Kalinski's very gracious and, putting some clips on our channel. Marshall's.
So these are the other shows that are being added to Breaking Points. These are the other shows that are being added to Breaking Points. Now, you may be familiar with some of them. Real News Network is actually decent. I like Real News Network, but the rest of these shows are suspect. But let me let him finish, and I'm going to point some things out.
Been doing these fantastic interviews. The Lever, obviously, the very first ones. They've been doing original reporting. Status Quo with Jordan Chariton. And look, Jordan.
The Lever is David Sirota, by the way. They didn't mention his name, but that's who that is.
May have a left-leaning perspective, but
I want you to listen to what he says about Status Quo, because this is something I've been trying to tell people about Breaking Points.
Original reporting. Status Quo with Jordan Chariton. And look, Jordan may have a left-leaning perspective, but the guy does good.
That part right there. Jordan may have a left-leaning perspective, but the guy does do good work on the ground. Why would Sagar feel the need to tell his audience or to alert them to the fact that Jordan has a left-leaning perspective? Why would Sagar need to do that when his co-host is supposed to be on the left? And this is something I've been trying to tell people about Breaking Points. A lot of people have been pointing fingers at Jimmy Dore, calling him right wing, or saying he's a right winger now. If you look at the comments in Breaking Points video section, Breaking Points has also cultivated a right-wing audience. Actually, I don't know if I would say Jimmy cultivated a right-wing audience. There's people on the right there and there's people on the left. But Breaking Points also has people on the right who watch them as well. So the question that I have to pose to you, people that are smearing Jimmy Dore as right-wing, why aren't they smearing Breaking Points as right-wing as well? Why aren't they calling out the fact that you have this gentleman here, Marshall, who's also on the right? Why don't they call out the fact that Sagar, although he calls himself a populist, Sagar is also on the right? So I guess the question that I have, why is it okay for Breaking Points to have right wingers as a part of their network, but it's not okay for Jimmy Dore to tell you how both parties are corrupt and to point out some of the pros of the Republicans that are in office? You see the hypocrisy? That goes to show you that some people are just going along to get along, and that some people are trying to be overly nice to some so that they can get attention from them. And then some of them are being heavily critical of people like Jimmy Dore so that they can get the attention from a network like Breaking Points. You guys get it? You see what's really going on? I hope more people call this out. I hope more people call it out. Everybody goes after Jimmy Dore saying he's right wing. Here you got Breaking Points. They got a right winger here. Oh, and it's a black conservative. How convenient. Is anybody going to call out Breaking Points for having a black conservative on their network? No, it's okay because it's Crystal and Sagar. Let them finish.
On the ground reporting, no matter what you might think of his own personal opinions. He did great clips for us from the JD Vance rally, had great clips there also with Nina Turner. He had somebody down in Texas. So we have great affiliate footage, real news. Great clips for us from the JD Vance.
Something else that's a little bit suspect here, The Intercept. So let me get this straight, ladies and gentlemen. Why would Breaking Points add The Intercept? Do you guys remember the story of why Glenn Greenwald left The Intercept? Glenn Greenwald had an article that he wrote about Joe Biden. The Intercept, by the way, which Glenn Greenwald started, The Intercept wouldn't let him publish that article. Why? Because at the end of the day, The Intercept is going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden. They didn't want him to put that article out because they still wanted people to vote for Joe Biden. So Glenn Greenwald left The Intercept. Now, why would Breaking Points add The Intercept to their network knowing what they do? Why? Because this is the message that they want to push. Pay close attention to the shows that have been added to this network. Again, with the exception of Real News Network, Chris Hedges is over there. But pay attention. What are all these people going to tell you to do come 2024? They're going to tell you to vote blue no matter who. If there's no progressive running against Joe Biden, all of them are going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden. At least on this network, they will. That's the message they're all putting. That's where someone like The Lever, that's where David Sirota comes in. That's where The Intercept comes in. Kyle's takes may be a little, somewhat more to the left than Breaking Points, but at the end of the day, all of these shows are going to tell you that you better vote for Joe Biden or otherwise you might end up with Trump again or DeSantis. That's the narrative that they are going to push. They're going to keep it blue, red. Because even someone like Marshall, even though he's conservative, he's not going to tell you to vote for Trump. You see what I'm saying? That's the problem. This is where they're headed. Now, I tried to tell people this before, that Breaking Points was not a left network. I don't know why some people still think that, but now why is this all important? I want to show you something. Now, Colin brought up a really good point. Colin said, so Jimmy Dore can't have right-wingers on his show, but Crystal Ball and Sagar can have Marshall Kosloff, a right-winger, on their podcast /network. Shout out to Sabby Sabs too for pointing this out. Yes, if you are a right winger of a certain class, and in this case, race, it's okay. They're going to push a certain narrative, you guys. And they have the numbers to do so. Now, I want to show you how Crystal and David Sirota have the same talking points when it comes to, well, yes, if you have two bad choices, I get it. You don't want to vote for them because they suck. And yes, I understand that. But at the same time, you're going to let the right win if you don't vote for them. Here's an example of Crystal Ball talking about withholding your vote. Watch the way she frames it. And also shout out to Kelly Lane for sending me this. Listen to this. This is how they work. So what I want to point out to you is this. This is why they would bring someone like David Sirota to that network. Because David Sirota has the same talking points. Watch how Crystal Ball frames this. She's going to start out like a leftist and make you say, yes, you need to withhold your vote. But watch how she ends. She uses the same framing that David Sirota did on that audio that you just heard at the beginning of this story.
Because whether they want to admit it or not, they do in fact need us in order to win. Now, they would certainly prefer not to have to give up anything of substance in order to get us on board. But in fact, their fixation on Trump and Trump alone does give us an advantage. The only question, and it's a big one, is if we're willing to use it. If we're actually willing in a coordinated fashion to make demands and be willing to withhold our votes. Individual voters here and there making their own unaffiliated decisions are in fact powerless. But as always, solidarity could be powerful. The only question, and again, it is an incredibly weighty one, is whether we're actually willing to grab that power and risk actually being the reason that Trump is reelected. Because while I think it's highly likely that because of their anti-Trump desperation, Democrats would cave to virtually any demands backed up by a truly credible threat, there's of course a chance that they don't. And there's of course a chance that such a coordinated anti-Biden opposition from the left would in fact result in a Trump reelection. And let's not sugarcoat what that means. It means being ready to carry the Trump admin's actions on your conscience, including the orphan babies at the border, the footsie with white nationalists, the deadly level of sheer incompetence. It means being willing to be absolutely and thoroughly despised, seen as true villains, or perhaps an even greater magnitude than Trump.
Did you hear what she just said? She started out good, the way a leftist would, right? Yes, there's power in withholding your vote. And then towards the end, she switched it up, just like David Sirota did, and said, well, if Trump wins, long story short, if Trump wins, then you would have to deal with having that on your conscience, that you let fascists win. That's the same rhetoric that Sirota gave on that audio call at the beginning of this story. All of these people, they're sheep herders. All of them are going to keep you voting Democrat. They'll play this game for years. For years, they'll say, we have a progressive. Vote for the progressive. The progressive loses. Well, you got to vote for the corporate Democrat, or otherwise we're going to end up like with someone like another Trump. They're all the same, guys. The narrative is the same. Whether Marshall is a conservative or not, he's not a Trump conservative. So Marshall will tell you to vote for Joe Biden too. This is the full circle. That's why you have people like David Sirota added to this network. Secular talk used to be decent back in the day, but Kyle started changing up his rhetoric last year. I already knew what was coming. You see it now? These are the people who are going to keep you in the Democratic Party. And Breaking Points has what, over 800,000 subscribers? Why do they want to do that? Money is one reason. And number two, because it's more comfortable and convenient for them to keep you doing the same thing. It's comfortable for them, even though it's not comfortable for you. Because we're not in the same with most of these people, we're not in the same income bracket. You have people like Crystal and Kyle, they're millionaires. David Sirota, he works not just for politics, political politics and journalism. He also works for Hollywood. These people are set financially. They don't have the same sense of urgency that we have, that working class people have, that even middle class people have, that poor people have. They don't have it. That's why you don't really hear them promoting direct action and mutual aid, because they don't want to do it. They don't want to go out in the street and protest. They want to do what's easier and sit behind a desk and tell you to keep voting. That's what works for them. Do you guys see where the real divide is now? The real divide is not about a Jimmy Dore left or a TYT left. The real divide is a fucking class divide. And that being said, David Sirota, I'm going to sum it up like this, and I'm going to end with this. David Sirota, he is the comfortable white moderate. He's the one that's going to tell you to keep doing the same strategy because that's what works for David. He's been deep in the Democratic Party. He's married to a Democrat politician. He's compromised. That's what works for him. What is the white moderate? I want you to listen what MLK said about the white moderate, because that's who David Sirota is. Even though he may say he's progressive, you need to listen to how MLK describes the white moderate. They're the ones that'll tell you to wait. Listen to how MLK describes the white moderate.
First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the...
Remember what I told you about the tension? What David Sirota was talking about with the tension? I told you to wait for it in this speech.
To a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action.
What?
Who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress.
What?
I had hoped that white moderates would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the Creator's attention. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive.
Yep.
We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured, so long as it is covered up, but must be open with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured.
David Sirota is the white moderate that MLK warned us about.